Welcome. And we will start right off with our
I am
bracha.
so confused.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So Kathleen had a question about yesterday's where we were talking about the severe capital punishment for idolatry. And Kathleen had a question. So Kathleen.
Okay, I was wondering why it went straight to like capital punishment instead of like a lighter sentence, so that they could come back to being
right.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. I think that it's giving you the maximum. It's giving you the maximum. And we know that nothing stands in the way of repentance. So that if a person were to clearly regret what they did, and actually Maimonides in his Mishneh Torah has a beautiful, beautiful section about the laws of repentance. And he describes the process and what's really involved in repenting. Nothing stands in that way. The only thing that's also going through my head on this one, though, is that this seems to be talking about someone who is trying to convince other people to behave in the same way in terms of becoming an idol worshiper. And that this is assuming that this person has not regretted what they've done and is in fact actively engaged in these kinds of things. This is also why we need an oral Torah along with the written Torah. So the written Torah has been compared to a skeleton, right? And the oral Torah is like the muscles and the sinews and the veins and the fat and the other parts that give a full body to the notion of Jewish law. And one thing that makes me happy, many things do, Kathleen, is the fact that we were able to discuss how significant it is to be in this kind of relationship, that the way Judaism describes creating a relationship by basically dedicating yourself to performing the will of God in specific acts and not in generalities, as actually a very amazing kind of thing. And one of our last lessons, we talked about how that all connects. There was something else too. I mean, what was bothering me at the time when we had this yesterday is the severity of it. And for us moderns, it's very hard for us to understand, at least for me it is, why it would be a capital offense. But then when I think it through, it's on a basis of strict justice. And the justice involved here is that if we allow for the fact that our very existence, our own personal existence, the existence of the universe itself, is all dependent on this ultimate divine creator, to deny the existence of the ultimate importance of that divine creator and to attribute other kinds of things and worship other kinds of things is so hugely insulting to the source of everything, including ourselves, that it's such an act of disrespect, lack of appreciation. It goes down to the very heart of the very reason why we exist. And so from a purely strict justice kind of position, it actually makes sense that such a crime, that such a thing is a crime and such a thing is a capital offense. And it's a purely rational kind of argument, I believe, and it all has to hang on the understanding that God, the ineffable creator of the universe, taking those kind of words in a very heavy kind of way, is the source of everything. And when we run off doing other kinds of things or denying that from a purely rational point of view, it's a capital offense. Now, I need to run ahead and say, that this doesn't mean that I think that every agnostic or atheist or, should be guilty of a capital offense. It actually is probably less. It's quite possible that were we to examine more carefully the nature of the atheism or the nature of the agnosticism, we might actually discover that it has more to do with the fact that they're not comfortable with anthropomorphic, notions of God. And if we were really to examine it, we'd find that actually that there is a level of belief in something beyond themselves. I think it's more of a problem of people who worship money or who worship power or who worship sex or worship those kinds of things and then run off and do things that are so incredibly damaging. So this is, at least I wanted to, take your question, and because it was such a great question, and examine it a little bit further. It hardly takes it down to its final, I think, PhD theses could be written about this kind of idea, this kind of topic, and I'm just basically skirting the surface, but trying to go a little bit deeper as far as this is concerned.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I really do. All the time you put into that. Thanks.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah, it is one of the top 10, and those are all capital offenses.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
They are. And
they are. And the
and,
first 5 are against God, which,
And we need to think about to ourselves, we have to somehow overcome our modernistic attitudes, or as Heschel puts so well, he talks, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but just recently reading Heschel's book, Between God and Man, he talks about 3 basic attitudes. One is that of fate, right? That you really have no control, that our lives are totally in the control of the fates, and we just have to sort of resign ourselves to whatever's going to happen in our lives. That's one approach. The other approach, which he calls positivistic, is basically an empirical approach, which says, nothing that isn't empirically observable, empirically provable, i.e. scientific, is worth consideration. And that, I think, is to a great extent a modernistic attitude, although it's always been around. But people who say they believe in science with implying that they don't believe in anything else. I mean, I believe in science. It's just that I believe in more than science. Okay.
And I think, Kathleen, I wasn't here yesterday, obviously, but were you asking specifically about the capital punishment issue?
Yes, it was.
Uh-huh. So I would say about that in the biblical world, there were, as I imagine it, as I see it, there were no like agnostics. You were either following this God or you're following that God, and you didn't fall between the crack. There were no cracks between the different belief systems. So, in that sense, in the biblical view of things, you were either with God or against God.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Which would be one way to understand it, like you're an actual traitor to God if you
worship another. Yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
It's not like our world at all.
Okay. So
kind of an advocate for atheism.
We might actually have a discussion about that, but regardless, let me make the third point. The third point that Heschel makes is that the third attitude is the biblical attitude.
Right.
Where there is a belief in a divine creator who you can reach out to. So you have Abraham when God shares with Abraham what he's going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. You have Abraham confronting God and doing that the biblical attitude is that we are given that ability to be able to reach out to the source of all and have that relationship. So Heschel distinguishes these 3 particular approaches. So yeah. So Shira Beth, I'm not sure where some of the Greek stuff would wind up. You read some of the Greek philosophers. I guess I just haven't read enough Aristotle, but it doesn't seem to me, I mean, maybe Aristotle does talk about a deity of some kind, I'm not sure, but he certainly seems to be much more empirical in general. So for example, he starts off this is the limited amount I've read of Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics. He starts off basically saying that what everybody wants is happiness, which is sort of more of an empirical analysis, I think, than anything else. So for whatever it's worth, I really believe there's nothing new under the sun, but I really appreciate the way you sort of framed it, that helps us understand why it would be, in fact, a capital case. Thank you. So, all right, let's dive into the text here and take a look.
Wait a minute. I got something.
Okay, sure.
Aristotle, this is according to Western Concepts of God, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Okay.
Aristotle made God passively responsible for change in the world in the sense that all things seek divine perfection. God imbues all things with order and purpose, both of which can be discovered and point to his or its divine existence. So, yeah.
So that's interesting, because I'm trying to understand. Thank you, Golda.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand to what degree God is really God in the biblical sense to Aristotle, because it still sounds like he's saying that human beings have a lot more to say about this.
It sounds like it's a more humanistic idea.
It does. And it sounds it's more naturalistic. So when it talks about, I believe I heard the word passive.
Yes.
Okay. And when I hear the word passive, right, that is not biblical, and it's more of a deism, right?
Right.
And so God is out there. Yeah. I mean, that's the way.
And God is in everything, and everything is,
well, that's pantheism. That's pantheism.
Well, not
so deism.
Not quite. Okay.
Deism is basically that we believe that there's a creator of some kind, and basically we talk about God being the big clockmaker, creating the clock, winding it up, and then it just runs by itself. And I think that is essentially, again, an empirical, that at least it's the beginnings of an empirical way of looking at the world.
Right. But now you have that answer. So.
Yeah. But thank you, Golda. Thank you for the research. All right, let's
Google.
Go into the text. Oh yeah. So we're on to a new approach here, and if something is too difficult, what it's saying is it's beyond, it's overwhelming, although that's not the right word. But the word pele means like something amazing, but it means that you can't understand it, right? If there's something that's beyond your understanding, lemishpat, regarding a judgment, right? Regarding a case, bein dam ledam. So literally it means between blood and blood. And what that exactly means, Rashi's going to tell us how the tradition understands these particular words. So I won't spoil Rashi, so I'm not going to say. Bein din ledin, between one case and another case, judgment. Uvein nega la nega, and this is between one plague and another plague. And this has to do with being able to determine whether that particular affliction is a leprous one or not, right? That it takes some judgment to make the distinction between these particular cases. Divrei rivot, or matters of strife, dispute. Bisharecha, in your gates, which of course means in your towns or your cities. The Kamta va'alita, you shall arise and go up. El hamakom, to the place, asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo, which the Lord your God has chosen. So stuff that really needs some explanation, right? Let's take a look. Starting back here, right? Ki pale, right? If something is beyond your understanding. Kol hafla'a, lashon havdalah. So it's very interesting that Rashi, in analyzing this word yipale, he says it has to do with distinction, right? Separation. being able to see, right, what is innocent, what is guilty, making these distinctions. And of course, the word Havdalah that we use regarding the little ceremony at the end of Shabbat is, again, it's about making a distinction between the Shabbat and the rest of the week. Ufrisha, frisha means separation, right? So the Pharisees, that word in English comes from the word prushim, and it has to do with the fact that these particular people were separated themselves from others. They were very meticulous, apparently, about the laws of Tuma and Tara, the laws of purity and impurity, and so they separated themselves. Shahadavar, so here's how he understands this word and applies it in our sentence. Shehadavar nivdal, that this particular matter is separated, right? Umechuseh, and is covered up from you. So that's how we sort of analyzed the nature of this lack of understanding of a particular case. Bein dam ledam, between blood and blood. And Rashi's, we have our quotation, the editor of this Rashi is telling us where Rashi describes it, right? Bein dam tameh ledam tahor, between blood that is considered impure, ledam tahor, and blood that is considered pure, okay? This may have to do with menstruation, but regardless, it has to do with knowing when there's impurity involved and when there isn't. And there are many laws that are involved in these particular things that we find in the Talmud. Bein din ladin, he says, between one court case, right, a case and another case. Bein din zakai, whether a person needs to be judged, or judgment, right, whether a person is to be judged innocent, ladin chayav, or whether a person is to be judged as guilty. So chayav, while it can be translated as guilt, it has more to do with owing. In other words, that you've done something and you are now lacking, so for example, that if you've stolen something, then you have to pay back a certain amount. So one who has a debt to society, you might say, right? We use that kind of metaphor regarding these sorts of things, right? To somebody who commits a crime. So it's interesting that we have some cultural similarities there. Uve nega la nega, and between one plague or affliction and another affliction. So he says, they nega tame, between one form that is impure, the nega tahor, and another kind that is pure. And we know that when we were reading those passages in Leviticus, right, Tazria Matzorah, we saw that the initial part had to do with being able to make distinctions between whether a person, in fact, was afflicted with leprosy or they weren't. And again, within the oral tradition, there's a lot of specific, cases and distinctions to be made regarding making that diagnosis. Divrei rivot, okay, matters of a riv is basically disagreement or strife, okay? A dispute, as you can see, I've got up here. Sheyu chachmei ha'ir chokim badavar. In a case where the wise people of the city disagree in a matter. So that's why it's divrei, right? Words of dispute, where these people who are experienced and knowledgeable are lack agreement, and they just can't come to any agreement. Zeh metameh, and Rashi gives a further specific example. This one holds that it's impure, v'zeh metaher, and this other group says, or this person says, no, it's pure. Zeh mechayev, or one who says that the person is guilty. V'zeh mezakeh, I'm going to say mezakeh, but it could be mazkeh. And this one says that, in fact, they're innocent. But come to Alita, and you shall go up, you shall arise and go up. Melamed. So this teaches what the language here, right? Of going up. Aliyah, right? And this is from Tractate Sanhedrin. Melamed. This teaches you, Shebeit HaMikdash, that the temple, the site of the temple, the holy temple, Gavoha, is higher Mikol HaMakomot, higher than any other place. Now, whether, of course, if you've been to Jerusalem, you can see that the site of the temple is lower than, say, the Mount of Olives or Mount Scopus. It's just that I think we're talking about its honor, its place of honor, that it is an honored place. And so going up is to go towards honor. Uvata el hakohanim haleviim, and you shall come to the Levitical priests, ve'el hashofet, and to the judge, asher yeh bayamim hahem, who is in those days, who is there in those days, v'darashta, and you shall examine, right? V'higidu lecha, and they will tell you et dvar hamishpat, the matter of judgment. They will adjudicate the case. So we see here, right, that there is a system, right, of higher courts, just as we have in this country. The idea that there's a need to have a system of courts, lower courts and higher courts, to discuss complicated cases and to try and establish justice. Rashi. HaKohanim HaLeviim, the Levitical priests. HaKohanim Shiatzu Mishevet Levi. He's just explaining that this, because normally it would just be Kohanim, right? Or Leviim, and the Kohanim are a subgroup of the Levites, and he simply says, the Kohanim who come out from the tribe of Levi. They're a subset of the tribe of Levi. Ve'el hashofet asher yeh bayamim hahem. Again, the need for such circumlocution, and to the judge who is in those days. So, of course, he's in those days. Who else are you going to? Afilu eino k'sha'ar shoftim, even if he isn't on the same level, shahayu lifanav, who were before him. Even if this particular judge isn't as qualified, knowledgeable, etc., honorable, perhaps, or respected, perhaps, you still have to listen to him. You don't have any other judge except the one that is in your days. So, while there may well be precedent, etc., ultimately, the person who's responsible is the leader that you have. You have to deal with the leader that you have, and that leader deserves at least a certain level of respect until he's or she has proven that they don't deserve any. But the idea of giving that authority, that level of authority, and by the way, the whole question of what authority is and how it's apportioned is not a simple question. Let's see if there's any more Rashi on this. See, no, it looks like there isn't a lot of Rashi for quite a bit. I'll just keep going. Yes, okay. Let's go back. So again, we're trying to set up a society that is a secure society. And so we really are discussing elements that make a society secure. And so, for example, respecting the individuals, respecting the process, that here we are going through a very, very challenging time in the United States with what has been termed the big lie, because there wasn't respect given to a process that is an essential part of the American democratic system, which is respecting elections and the electoral process and having faith in it. And I think there's a connection with what we're reading here. Let's see. Okay. Va'asita al pi hadavar asher yagidu lacha. And you shall perform, you shall practice, you shall do according to what they tell you, according to the words that they tell you. Min hamakom hahu, from that particular place, meaning, of course, from the temple. And there was a special room in the temple, in the wall of the temple, called the Lishkat Hagazit, which was the chamber of hewn stone, where the great Sanhedrin sat. And of course, the Sanhedrin consisted of 70 elders to discuss these ultimate questions. Okay, Asher Yivchar Hashem, which the Lord will choose, the Shamarta, and you shall be careful, you shall watch, right? Asot, to perform, Kachol Asher Yorucha, according to all which they will teach you. They will teach you. Again, I think the idea of having so many people is again a safeguard, right? It's against despotism, and that there's a better chance of a fair practice. There's safety in numbers. Of course, there's no guarantee, but nevertheless, you do whatever you can to try and safeguard the institutions that you have. Al pi haTorah, according to the teaching, Asher Yorucha, which they will teach you. So Torah, Yorucha, these are all connected words. Va'al hamishpat, and according to the ordinances, Asher Yomru Lacha, that they will tell you, Ta'aseh, you shall perform. Lo tasur, you shall not turn aside. Min hadavar asher yagidu lacha, from the matter which they tell you, yamin or small, to the left or to the right. You have yamin or small, there's a Rashi here, left or right. Afilu omer lacha al yamin, look at this. This is the sifrei. Even if they say to you, al yamin shehu small, even if they tell you about the right, that it is left, the al small shehu yamin, and on the left that it is right, the chol shechen, and certainly all the more so, kisheomer lacha, when he tells you al yamin yamin, when he says about what is the right, the right side, that it is the right side, the al small, and on the left side, it is the left side. So even if you question their authority, this is very interesting, and I'm sure that there's a lot that's written about this and that needs further interpretation. But again, we want to establish authority. We don't want anarchy. And where the lines of crossing happen, that's of course stuff that needs to be teased out. But nevertheless, we need a foundation of authority. Otherwise, there's anarchy. So let me make sure we got here. Okay, going on. Sentence. V'ha'ish asher yaseh bezadon, and the man, the individual who performs intentionally, the vilti shmoa, not to hearken, not to listen, el hakohen, to the priest, ha'omed l'sharet sham et Hashem Elokecha, who is standing there to serve there, okay, well, he stands to serve there, Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, or el hashofet, or to the judge, umet ha'ish hahu, it's a capital offense. That person shall die, uvi'ata hara Yisrael, so that you, literally it means to burn out or to remove wickedness from Israel. I'll take one more sentence so that we can get to this particular place. V'chol ha'am yishma'u v'yira'u, and all the people will hear and will be in awe. V'lo yizidun od, and they won't just do whatever they want, right? Basically, act arrogantly, act intentionally to disregard the law. And we know how damaging it is when you consider yourself above the law. Rashi, v'chol ha'am yishma'u, and all the people shall hear. Mikan, and from this we can derive mamtinim lo ad haregel. This is so interesting that we have to wait for this person until the pilgrim festival, umamtinim or umamitin oto, excuse me, and one executes him during or at the time of the pilgrim festival. So that's the reason they can derive that is when it says v'chol ha'am, and all the people, because as a pilgrim festival, everyone would be gathering around at that time. But also the idea of holding up an execution, and again, I would think that this gives a person, first of all, it gives an opportunity to get any additional testimony that might be required. Possibly it also means that it gives a person perhaps an opportunity to do tshuva if they haven't damaged things too much, too far. So we'll stop here. You can see though that, well, let's say this, if you see that there's so much more to all of this, then that's probably the main message I can give, that there's so much to this. So much to study and to try and learn. It's a constant lifetime process. So I'll stop the share. And are there any other comments before I stop the recording?